In the autumn of 1890, in a small, unassuming town in Texas, a child was born who would one day command the largest military operation in human history. His name was Dwight David Eisenhower, but to the world, he would simply be known as Ike. At first glance, nothing about his early years suggested greatness. He was not born into wealth, nor into power. His father was a mechanic, his mother a devoutly religious woman who valued discipline and hard work. The Eisenhowers were ordinary people, part of America's struggling working class. But from these humble beginnings came a boy whose determination, resilience, and leadership would one day alter the course of the 20th century. Dwight was the third of 7 sons. The Eisenhower household was noisy, competitive, and full of energy. From an early age, Dwight learned the value of teamwork and discipline, not from classrooms or books, but from daily life, sharing food, fighting for chores, and competing with his brothers in sports and games. That competitive spirit would never leave him. His mother, Ida Eisenhower, was a stern but deeply principled woman. She belonged to a religious movement that rejected violence and war. Ironically, from this household of peace and pacifism, would rise one of the greatest generals the world had ever seen. Young Dwight absorbed his mother's lessons of honesty and integrity, values that shaped his leadership for the rest of his life. But there was another side to him. He was adventurous, bold, and had a fiery temper. Once, in a fit of anger, he punched a tree so hard that his knuckles bled. His parents scolded him, but it revealed a spirit that could not easily be broken. By the time Dwight reached high school, he was passionate about sports, especially football. He dreamed not of politics or war, but of becoming a professional athlete. Yet fate had other plans. In 1911, after graduating, Eisenhower sought opportunities beyond his small-town life. A friend suggested he apply to the United States Military Academy at West Point. At first, Dwight hesitated. He wasn't particularly drawn to military life, but West Point offered a free education, discipline, and a future. He applied, and to his surprise, he was accepted. Arriving at West Point was like stepping into another world. The gray uniforms, the strict rules, the relentless drills, everything was designed to break young men down and rebuild them as soldiers. For Dwight, it was both a challenge and an opportunity. He wasn't the best student academically, but he shone in leadership, organization, and sports. His commanding presence, natural charisma, and ability to inspire others set him apart. But life was not without setbacks. While playing football for West Point, Eisenhower suffered a devastating knee injury that ended his athletic dreams forever. For weeks, he was crushed. The young man who once dreamed of glory on the football field now faced uncertainty. But instead of surrendering to despair, he redirected his ambition. If not sports, then leadership. If not a football field, then a battlefield. By the time he graduated in 1915, Eisenhower was part of what came to be known as the class the stars fell on, a graduating class that produced more generals than any other in American history. The seeds of destiny were already planted. As World War I raged across Europe, Eisenhower expected to be sent into combat. He longed for the chance to prove himself. But fate, once again, had different ideas. Instead of the front lines of France, he was assigned to training camps in the United States. While his classmates went overseas and won medals, Eisenhower remained behind, training tank crews, organizing units, and developing strategies. At first, he was disappointed. But in hindsight, this was a blessing. The experience gave him a reputation as an organizer, a planner, and a man who could manage complexity under pressure. It was not glamorous work, but it was the foundation of the skills that would one day make him supreme commander of the Allied forces. As the war ended in 1918, Eisenhower had never seen combat. Many officers felt overlooked. But Dwight remained patient. He believed destiny still had something larger in store for him. In the 1920s, he worked under General Fox Connor, who became his mentor. Connor taught Eisenhower the grand strategy of war, the balance between politics and the battlefield, and the importance of coalition warfare. These lessons would prove invaluable decades later, when Eisenhower would have to unite armies from across the world under one command. Later, he served with General Douglas MacArthur in the Philippines. Here, Eisenhower honed his diplomatic and organizational skills. He wasn't just learning how to fight wars, he was learning how to manage egos, politics, and international relationships. By the late 1930s, as Europe edged toward another great conflict, Eisenhower was still relatively unknown, a quiet officer with no combat record. But those who worked with him recognized his brilliance. He was calm under pressure, an exceptional planner, and above all, a leader who could inspire loyalty. What Eisenhower didn't know was that history was preparing him for a role far greater than he could imagine. Soon, the world would be engulfed in the most destructive war humanity had ever seen. And when that moment came, Dwight D. Eisenhower would rise from obscurity to become the man the free world turned to for salvation. From a small-town boy in Texas, to the disciplined halls of West Point, to the sidelines of World War I, Eisenhower's journey was just beginning. The stage was set for his transformation from a quiet officer into the supreme commander of history's greatest military alliance. When the 1930s drew to a close, the world stood on the edge of chaos. Across the Atlantic, Adolf Hitler had rebuilt Germany into a terrifying war machine. In Asia, Japan's empire was expanding violently. The storm of global conflict was gathering. And yet, in America, Dwight D. Eisenhower was still an unknown colonel. He had spent years in the shadows, an organizer, a planner, a man who trained others for war but had never fired a shot in combat himself. Many officers thought Eisenhower's career would remain quiet, that he would retire with little recognition. But history had a very different destiny in store. In 1939, World War II erupted in Europe. Germany crushed Poland in weeks, then turned its fury on France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The Blitzkrieg shocked the world. Nations fell like dominoes. Britain stood alone against Hitler's seemingly unstoppable war machine. At first, the United States remained on the sidelines. But behind the scenes, American leaders were preparing. President Franklin D. Roosevelt knew America could not stay out forever. The nation would need strong commanders, men who could organize, strategize, and inspire. For Eisenhower, the turning point came in 1941. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States was thrust into war. The nation mobilized, and Eisenhower was suddenly catapulted from obscurity into positions of immense responsibility. General George C. Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, recognized Eisenhower's brilliance. Marshall had a keen eye for talent, and when he asked Eisenhower to draft war plans for defeating Germany and Japan, Eisenhower's answers impressed him deeply. Marshall promoted Eisenhower rapidly, assigning him to the War Plans Division in Washington. Here, Eisenhower demonstrated not only a sharp military mind but also an ability to think globally. He understood that the coming war would not just be fought with tanks and guns, it would require coordination between nations, economies, and peoples. But Eisenhower was no desk soldier. By 1942, Marshall knew the United States needed leaders overseas, commanders who could manage not only battlefields but also allies. Eisenhower was sent to London, where he faced his greatest test yet, organizing the Allied invasion of North Africa. In November 1942, Operation Torch became Eisenhower's first major command. The Allies would land in French North Africa, confronting not only German forces but also French troops loyal to the Vichy regime. For Eisenhower, this was a moment of truth. He had never commanded men in combat before. Now, he was responsible for an invasion involving hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft, and over 100,000 troops. The stakes could not have been higher. The landings were chaotic. French resistance was fierce in some areas, negotiations stalled in others, and German reinforcements threatened disaster. Eisenhower found himself not only a general but a diplomat, shuttling between negotiations with French commanders while directing military operations. His calm demeanor, his ability to mediate between conflicting sides, and his determination to hold the coalition together proved decisive. Within weeks, French forces joined the Allies, and the Axis powers began to crumble in North Africa. For the first time, Eisenhower showed the world his unique gift, not as a battlefield tactician like Patton or Montgomery, but as a supreme organizer, a leader who could unite diverse armies and personalities into one fighting force. Yet victory was not easy. In early 1943, American troops suffered a humiliating defeat at the Battle of Kasserine Pass, where inexperienced soldiers were routed by German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox. Critics whispered that Eisenhower was in over his head. But Ike did not panic. He reorganized the command, brought in tougher leadership, and allowed aggressive generals like George S. Patton to take charge of frontline operations. Slowly, the Americans hardened. By May 1943, the Allies triumphed in North Africa, capturing over 250,000 Axis troops. For Eisenhower, the lesson was clear: wars were not won overnight. They required patience, adaptation, and above all, unity among allies. With North Africa secure, the Allies debated their next move. Should they strike directly at France or attack the soft underbelly of Europe, Italy? After tense meetings, the Allies agreed on invading Sicily in July 1943. Once again, Eisenhower was in command. The invasion was a success, forcing Italy out of the war and bringing down Mussolini's fascist regime. But the Germans fought ferociously in the mountains of Italy, dragging the campaign into a bloody stalemate. For Eisenhower, Sicily and Italy were stepping stones, but he knew the real prize lay elsewhere: France. The liberation of Western Europe would require the greatest amphibious invasion in history. And it would fall to Eisenhower to lead it. By 1943, Eisenhower's reputation had soared. He was promoted to Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. But this title came with enormous pressure. Eisenhower had to manage not just armies but the towering egos of men like Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, Charles de Gaulle, Bernard Montgomery, and George Patton. Each had their own ambitions, their own strategies, their own pride. Yet Eisenhower's genius was not in battlefield brilliance but in diplomacy. He listened, he mediated, he compromised, and when necessary, he made firm decisions. As British historian John Keegan later wrote, his genius lay in his ability to manage allies, to keep together a coalition that might easily have fallen apart. The stage was now set for the ultimate test. The Allies were preparing for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. The eyes of the world turned to Eisenhower. The fate of millions, perhaps of civilization itself, rested on his shoulders. The quiet boy from Abilene, Kansas, who once dreamed of playing football, now held the burden of history. Ahead lay the storm of D-Day, the greatest gamble of World War II. The year was 1944. Europe groaned under the iron heel of Nazi rule. France was occupied, millions lived in terror, and the Soviet Union was bleeding on the Eastern Front. To end the war, the Allies needed a bold strike, a return to Western Europe. The mission had a code name: Operation Overlord. History would remember it simply as D-Day. And at the center of it all stood General Dwight D. Eisenhower. By late 1943, Eisenhower had been chosen as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. The responsibility was immense. He would command the largest amphibious invasion in human history, an operation involving over 156,000 troops, 7,000 ships, and 11,000 aircraft. The stakes could not have been higher. Success would mean the liberation of Europe. Failure could prolong the war for years, or even lose it. In private moments, Eisenhower admitted the crushing weight he carried. He knew that if D-Day failed, history would not blame Churchill or Roosevelt. It would blame him. For months, Eisenhower oversaw meticulous planning. His staff debated every detail: where to land, how to deceive the Germans, how to coordinate armies from the United States, Britain, Canada, and beyond. The chosen landing site was Normandy, a stretch of beaches in northern France. Not the most obvious choice, many expected an attack at Calais, but that was the point. Deception was key. Eisenhower approved a massive intelligence campaign, codenamed Operation Fortitude, to trick the Germans into thinking the invasion would strike elsewhere. Fake armies, inflatable tanks, false radio traffic, an elaborate web of lies convinced Hitler to hold back his best troops far from Normandy. As June 1944 approached, everything hinged on the weather. The English Channel was notoriously unpredictable. Waves, wind, and cloud cover could doom the invasion before it even began. On June 5, the seas raged with storms. Eisenhower faced an impossible choice: delay the invasion and risk German discovery, or launch and risk disaster. His meteorologists predicted a brief window of calm the following day. Eisenhower gathered his commanders. Silence filled the room. All eyes turned to him. After a long pause, he spoke the words that launched history. "Okay. Well, go." At dawn, the horizon of Normandy erupted in fire. Allied warships unleashed a thunderous bombardment, while paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines in the darkness of night. The beaches had code names: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Each became a crucible of courage and sacrifice. At Omaha Beach, American troops faced withering machine gun fire. The sea turned red as soldiers struggled ashore. For hours, the invasion hung in the balance. But grit, determination, and sheer willpower carried the day. By nightfall, the Allies had secured a foothold in Europe. It came at a terrible cost, over 4,000 Allied dead on the first day alone, but the beachhead held. The tide of history had turned. Throughout the campaign, Eisenhower's leadership was steady and unshakable. He visited troops before the invasion, speaking not as a distant general, but as Ike, the approachable commander who shared their fears and hopes. In his pocket, Eisenhower carried a handwritten note, prepared in case of failure. It read, "If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." This simple message revealed his character: humble, responsible, and deeply human. After Normandy, the Allies surged forward. Paris was liberated in August 1944. Crowds cheered as Eisenhower's armies marched through the streets, the dream of freedom reborn. But the war was not over. Hitler launched one last desperate counterattack, the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. In the frozen forests of Belgium, German tanks smashed into American lines, threatening to split the Allies apart. Once again, Eisenhower's calm leadership held firm. He coordinated reinforcements, trusted his field commanders, and refused to panic. Slowly, the Allies pushed back, turning the tide once more. By spring 1945, Allied armies had crossed the Rhine River and poured into Germany. Meanwhile, the Soviets advanced from the east, closing in on Berlin. Eisenhower made a critical decision. Instead of racing to Berlin, he halted the American advance and allowed the Soviets to take the city. It was a political choice, designed to avoid unnecessary casualties and respect agreements with Stalin. On May 7, 1945, in Reims, France, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. The nightmare of Nazism was destroyed. For millions, Eisenhower became the face of victory. Not because he was the most brilliant tactician, but because he was the man who held the coalition together. He managed Churchill and Roosevelt, Montgomery and Patton, de Gaulle and Stalin, a task as complex as any battle. The humble boy from Kansas had become the liberator of Europe. Yet for Eisenhower, triumph carried its shadows. He had seen the devastation of war, the shattered cities, the camps of horror, the cost of freedom. And though he was celebrated as a hero, he longed for peace. Little did he know, another chapter awaited him. From soldier, he would soon become a statesman. From General Eisenhower, he would become President Eisenhower. The guns of Europe had fallen silent. On May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, crowds filled the streets of London, Paris, and New York, cheering, crying, celebrating the end of one of history's darkest chapters. At the heart of that victory stood Dwight D. Eisenhower. He had guided the Allies through D-Day, through Normandy, through the march across Europe, until Nazi Germany lay in ruins. To millions, he was not just a general, he was a symbol of hope. But Eisenhower himself did not feel like a conqueror. He was exhausted. He had seen death and destruction on a scale few could imagine. And though the war had ended in Europe, the Pacific still burned. Only in August 1945, after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, would World War II finally be over. After the war, Eisenhower returned to America a hero. Parades, cheers, newspapers, and magazines all hailed Ike as the man who saved freedom. Strangers stopped him on the street. Children waved at him. Politicians whispered about him. But Eisenhower was not a man who craved the spotlight. He longed for a quiet life. He wanted to write his memoirs, spend time with his wife Mamie, and perhaps retire. Yet history refused to let him rest. In 1948, Eisenhower became president of Columbia University in New York. It seemed a peaceful role, but even there, he found himself pulled into politics, advising on foreign policy and the growing Cold War with the Soviet Union. Soon after, President Truman asked Eisenhower to return to service, this time as Supreme Commander of NATO. Once again, Eisenhower was building coalitions, this time not for war, but for defense. His mission, to unite Western Europe against the growing Soviet threat. By the early 1950s, America was restless. The Korean War dragged on with no end in sight. Fear of communism spread across the nation. At home, Senator Joseph McCarthy fueled suspicion and division with his anti-communist crusades. In this tense atmosphere, both Democrats and Republicans turned to Eisenhower. Here was a man who had defeated Hitler, who had kept the Allied coalition together, who symbolized strength and unity. For years, Eisenhower resisted. He did not see himself as a politician. He disliked partisanship, preferring compromise over conflict. But by 1952, he could no longer refuse. His country needed him. Eisenhower announced his candidacy for president under the Republican Party. His slogan captured the spirit of the nation. "I like Ike." The phrase spread like wildfire. Buttons, posters, and banners carried the simple, friendly words. Americans did not just admire Eisenhower, they trusted him. Facing Democratic candidate Adlai Stevenson, Eisenhower's campaign was one of optimism and reassurance. He promised to end the war in Korea, to contain communism abroad, and to bring honesty and stability to government. His military background gave him unmatched credibility. Crowds greeted him with thunderous applause wherever he went. For many Americans, voting for Eisenhower was like voting for a safe, steady hand in uncertain times. On election day, the result was overwhelming. Eisenhower won in a landslide, carrying 39 states and over 55% of the popular vote. The general had become president. When Eisenhower entered the White House in January 1953, the Cold War defined the world. The United States and the Soviet Union stood locked in a dangerous rivalry. Nuclear weapons loomed as the ultimate threat. Eisenhower's first promise was fulfilled quickly. He pushed for an armistice in Korea, which was signed in July 1953. Though the war ended without a clear victory, Americans were relieved. The killing had stopped. Yet Eisenhower knew peace was fragile. His strategy, known as the New Look policy, focused on nuclear deterrence. Instead of matching the Soviets tank for tank, plane for plane, Eisenhower emphasized America's nuclear arsenal as a shield against aggression. The threat of massive retaliation kept the peace, but also deepened the global arms race. At the same time, Eisenhower championed peace initiatives. He launched the Atoms for Peace program at the United Nations, proposing to share nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. His vision was a world where atomic energy could light homes instead of destroying cities. At home, Eisenhower quietly transformed the nation. In 1956, he signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, creating the interstate highway system. It was the largest public works project in American history. Miles of concrete roads spread across the nation, connecting cities, fueling commerce, and reshaping daily life. The highways became a symbol of mobility and freedom, an achievement still felt today. Eisenhower's presidency was also marked by the early battles of the civil rights movement. In 1954, the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education declared racial segregation in schools unconstitutional. In 1957, when 9 black students, later known as the Little Rock Nine, attempted to attend Central High School in Arkansas, they were met with violent mobs. The state governor refused to enforce the court's ruling. Eisenhower, though cautious on civil rights, recognized that federal law must be upheld. Reluctantly, he sent the 101st Airborne Division to escort the students into the school. It was a powerful moment, the President of the United States using federal troops not for war abroad, but for justice at home. Through his 2 terms, Eisenhower was not a flashy president. He was calm, measured, and often underestimated. Critics accused him of being too passive, of playing too much golf, of lacking vision. Yet beneath his relaxed demeanor was a master strategist. He avoided rash decisions, steered America through the dangerous 1950s without major war, and balanced budgets while expanding prosperity. By 1960, as he prepared to leave office, America was wealthier, stronger, and more stable than when he had arrived. But Eisenhower left with a warning. In his farewell address, he cautioned Americans about the rise of the military-industrial complex, the growing influence of defense contractors, and the risk of endless militarization. His words, spoken by a career soldier, carried unusual weight. Eisenhower knew that unchecked power could threaten democracy itself. From the battlefields of Normandy to the Oval Office, Dwight D. Eisenhower had led his nation through war and peace. He was not perfect, but he was steady. Not a man of rhetoric, but a man of results. The boy from Abilene, Kansas, had become both a liberator of Europe and a guardian of America. By 1961, Dwight D. Eisenhower was preparing to leave the White House. For 8 years, he had guided America through Cold War tensions, economic growth, and the first sparks of the civil rights movement. Now, at 70 years old, the soldier-turned-president prepared his final address to the nation. On January 17, 1961, Americans tuned in to their televisions and radios. Eisenhower's voice, steady but somber, carried a message that echoed far beyond his presidency. He warned of something few had considered before. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. These words, spoken by a 5-star general, stunned the nation. Eisenhower, who had led armies across Europe, was telling America that unchecked military power, combined with corporate interests, could endanger liberty. It was not a message of fear, but of caution. He wanted the America he fought for to remain free, balanced, and democratic. Eisenhower left office with a mixed record, but a profound impact. He had ended the Korean War. He had kept America out of larger wars, even as the Cold War raged. He had built the interstate highways that reshaped the American landscape. He had cautiously advanced civil rights, setting the stage for greater struggles to come. Above all, he had given the world an example of leadership rooted not in ego, but in responsibility. Eisenhower believed in teamwork, in compromise, in steady judgment. He was not a fiery speaker like Churchill, nor a bold visionary like Roosevelt. Yet in his quiet way, he achieved what few others could. He kept peace during an era when global war was only a misstep away. After leaving Washington, Eisenhower retired to his farm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the only home he ever owned. There, he painted, wrote his memoirs, and welcomed friends and visitors from around the world. But even in retirement, he remained a symbol of wisdom. Presidents Kennedy and Johnson often sought his advice. Foreign leaders paid him respect. On March 28, 1969, Dwight David Eisenhower passed away at the age of 78. The nation mourned. Millions remembered Ike, the Kansas farm boy who became Supreme Commander and then President of the United States. He was laid to rest in Abilene, Kansas, beside Mamie, the love of his life, and their firstborn son, who had died in infancy. Today, Eisenhower is remembered as a man of balance. Not a man of extremes, but a leader who steadied the world when it could so easily have spun into chaos. He taught that true leadership is not about glory, but about responsibility. Not about speeches, but about decisions. Not about power, but about peace. Eisenhower's legacy lives on in the roads Americans drive, the freedoms they cherish, and the caution he urged about the dangers of unchecked power. From the beaches of Normandy to the halls of the White House, Dwight D. Eisenhower stood at the crossroads of history. He was the soldier who hated war, the general who sought peace, and the president who warned the future. And perhaps that is why history remembers him simply, and fondly, as Ike. And that was the story of Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, President, and a man whose legacy still shapes our world. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Epoch, where we uncover the untold stories, the hidden chapters, and the turning points that shaped our past. Subscribe now, and never miss the next hidden epoch of history.